There is a fruit so old it predates writing. So embedded in the architecture of human civilization that without it, entire empires would have collapsed before they were named. It fed soldiers crossing mountain passes in winter. It preserved calories when nothing else could. It carried the prayers of the dead and the promises of the living. It grew on steep, broken, impossibly thin soil where wheat refused to root and corn would never survive. And yet, somehow, we forgot what it really was. Not the fruit itself. We still consume it, billions of pounds each year, pressed and bottled and labeled and shipped in temperature-controlled containers across oceans. But what we consume now is a domesticated ghost, a shadow of something far older, far wilder, and far more resilient than the neat rows of irrigated vines you see photographed in golden light on the covers of lifestyle magazines. What was lost was not the fruit. What was lost was the knowledge that surrounded it, the systems, the memory, the 8,000 years of accumulated human understanding about what this plant truly was, and what it was truly capable of. That knowledge did not disappear by accident. This is ancient food files. We exist to recover what the modern world has misplaced, not through nostalgia, but through documentation. If you are watching this for the first time, consider subscribing, not because we ask for numbers, but because what we preserve here is a record, and records require witnesses. Before you continue watching, please check the link I provided in this video's description. That way, you can verify it yourself. Now, open the archive. The earliest confirmed cultivation of what scholars now call Vitis vinifera, the climbing, clustering, sun-seeking berry that would reshape the ancient world, occurred in the South Caucasus region of Eurasia, in what is now the modern nation of Georgia, approximately 6,000 years before the Common Era. 6,000 years before Christ, before Rome, before Greece, before Egypt had built a single pyramid. The people who first cultivated it did not call it by any name we recognize. The ancient Georgians called their relationship with it gvino, a word that predates the Latin, predates the Greek oinos, predates nearly every linguistic root that survives in the modern world. In the oral traditions of the South Caucasus, the vine was not a crop, it was a covenant, a living agreement between the earth and the people who tended it. To destroy a man's vines was to destroy his ancestors. To inherit a man's vines was to inherit his name. The plant itself is extraordinary in ways that have nothing to do with what it produces. Vitis vinifera grows on nearly vertical slopes of fractured limestone and volcanic ash where the soil is so thin and so nutrient poor that most agricultural plants would wither within a season. It sends roots down, sometimes 12, sometimes 15 feet deep, searching for water that exists far beneath the surface. Its trunk, over decades, becomes something close to wood, not quite tree, not quite shrub, something older than either category. A single vine, left undisturbed, can live for more than a century. Some documented specimens in the Balkans and the Iberian Peninsula are believed to be over 400 years old, still producing fruit, still drawing from the same root system that was planted by hands long since turned to soil. It does not require irrigation once established. It does not require fertilizer. In many of its wild expressions, it does not require human intervention at all. This is precisely why empires wanted it, and precisely why modern agriculture could not fully contain it. The Romans understood what the vine meant before they understood why. They carried it into Gaul, into Hispania, into the Rhine Valley, into Britain, not because they expected it to thrive in those climates, but because the vine was their civilization made portable. Every Roman military outpost of significant permanence planted a vineyard within its first years of establishment. This is documented. This is archaeological record. The juice of the clustered fruit was mixed with water, not for pleasure, but for safety. In a world without reliable clean water, the mild acidity of fermented juice made river water survivable. Roman soldiers consumed it daily as medicine, as calories, as morale. In 79 AD, when Vesuvius buried Pompeii, the excavations of the 18th and 19th centuries revealed wine jars in nearly every household, from the wealthiest merchant to the most modest laborer. The sacred berry was not a luxury in the ancient world, it was infrastructure. During the Black Death of the 14th century, when entire villages in France and Italy lost more than half their populations within months, The survivors who tended the vines were often the ones who maintained enough caloric and communal structure to rebuild. The vine did not die with them, it waited. It continued growing over collapsed stone walls and through the windows of abandoned farmhouses. When the surviving populations returned, the vines had not forgotten them. They never forget. And then came the 19th century, and with it, the first true erasure. In 1863, a microscopic insect called Phylloxera vastatrix, carried inadvertently on American rootstock brought to France, began destroying the root systems of European vineyards at a scale that historians would later describe as the worst agricultural disaster in recorded history. Within 20 years, it had annihilated nearly 40% of all cultivated vines across France, Spain, Italy, and Portugal. Millions of acres of heritage vines, some carrying root systems that were 2 and 3 centuries old, were gone within a decade. The solution, when it finally came, was elegant and devastating in equal measure. European vines were grafted onto American rootstock that was naturally resistant to the insect. It worked, the vineyards recovered, the industry survived. But the wild, ancient, ungrafted expressions of Vitis vinifera, the ones that had never been domesticated, the ones still growing in the mountain valleys of Georgia and Armenia and the abandoned terraces of the Levant, were not part of that recovery. They were not commercially viable, they could not be standardized, their yields were unpredictable, their flavors were too complex, too variable, too unwilling to conform to the requirements of a market that was beginning, for the first time in history, to demand consistency above all else. What cannot be owned cannot survive modern systems. What cannot be replicated at scale becomes, in the language of industry, inconvenient. And so the ancient varieties, the ones with indigenous names, the ones embedded in oral traditions, the ones that had grown in terraced hillside gardens for thousands of years, were replaced, quietly, without announcement, without eulogy. Science, as it often does, arrived late to the conversation. In the early 2000s, researchers at the University of California, Davis began genomic analysis of ancient vine specimens collected from the South Caucasus. What they found confirmed what Georgian oral tradition had insisted for millennia: the domesticated vine originated in a single geographic location, from a single wild ancestor, and had been cultivated continuously in that region for longer than any other fruit crop on Earth. In 2013, a study published in the journal PLOS One documented over 500 distinct indigenous vine varieties still surviving in Georgia alone, many of them unknown to Western viticulture, many of them possessing disease resistance profiles that modern commercial varieties had lost entirely through the grafting process of the 19th century. The ancient knowledge was not mythology, it was data. It had simply been stored in soil and root and oral tradition rather than in institutions and laboratories. Quiet confirmation, no fanfare, no apology. There is something else worth saying, though it is harder to measure. In communities where the clustered fruit was the staple, where it was eaten fresh, dried, pressed, fermented, and preserved in every form across every season, the memory of that relationship did not disappear cleanly. It became complicated. Survival foods carry the weight of the conditions that made survival necessary. The ancient berry of the Caucasus was also the fruit pressed by enslaved labor in colonial vineyards. It was also the crop of the famine garden. It was also the thing you ate when nothing else remained. Memory is not neutral. Forgetting, sometimes, is a form of survival. But forgetting is not the same as losing. The soil is changing now. The aquifers are dropping, the growing seasons are shifting at a pace that modern monoculture agriculture, dependent on precise irrigation schedules and calibrated chemical inputs, was not designed to accommodate. The ancient vine, in its wild and ungrafted expressions, was designed for exactly this. It was designed for thin soil and broken limestone, for drought, for the long, slow patience of a root system that has no deadline, for the kind of time that industrial agriculture has never learned to work with. Georgia's government, in collaboration with international botanical organizations, has begun a formal program to preserve and propagate indigenous vine varieties. As of 2022, over 525 distinct Georgian vine varieties have been documented and placed in protected cultivation. Researchers in Spain and Italy have begun identifying pre-Phylloxera rootstock survivors, Vines that were never grafted, that survived the 19th century disaster through geographic isolation, that still carry the full ancient genetic profile of their ancestors. They have been there all along, waiting, growing, remembering. There is a phrase that appears in several Georgian folk traditions, though it translates imperfectly into English. Roughly, it means, the vine knows the name of every person who has ever touched it. Modern science would not phrase it that way, but modern science is beginning to understand something that the people of the South Caucasus have understood for 8,000 years, that a plant with a root system this deep, this old, this deliberately cultivated across this many generations, carries a kind of record. Not sentimental, biological. The vine does not need us to remember it, it has been doing that work itself, in soil that no one planted, in valleys that no archive has catalogued, in the slow, patient grammar of root and stone and winter and return. The knowledge was never lost. It was only waiting for us to become quiet enough to hear it again. Nature does not require permission to persist, it does not require recognition, it does not require that we understand it before it continues doing what it has always done, reaching downward, holding ground, producing from almost nothing something that humans, across every civilization and every century, have found worth preserving. This is Ancient Food Files. If this record matters to you, preserve it, subscribe, so that the next time we open an archive, you are there to witness it. The vine has waited 8,000 years. It can wait a little longer,